Hi, everybody. My name is Jared Milrad. I'm the founder of Movie Karma. We're a nonprofit organization based in Los Angeles, California, focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and social impact in storytelling. We look at storytelling and really how stories and content can be a force for good and for social change around the world. Today, I'm really excited to have two special guests here in our podcast, Rewriting Hollywood. Both are, incredibly talented folks who have made a really powerful film called Rustin. And our guest today, before I dive into the film, Bruce Cohen is a film, television, and theater producer. Best known for his production, the Academy Award nominated films Milk, Silver Linings Playbook, and American Beauty, for which he won the Academy Award for Best Picture. Tonia Davis, known for Underwater, Snatched, The Greatest Showman, and in 2019, Tonia was named co-head of Barack and Michelle Obama's Higher Ground Pictures. And I'm a very proud Obama alum in both campaigns. So very excited to talk about that as well as in the first term in the White House during the Obama administration. And then just for folks who haven't heard about the film Rustin on Netflix, it's about Bayard Rustin, an advisor to Martin Luther King Jr., who dedicated his life really to the quest for racial equality, for human rights, and for worldwide democracy. But as an openly gay Black man, he really has all been but erased until now from much of the civil rights movement that he helped to build. So, Bruce, Tonia, really excited to have you on our show. Thanks for being on.
Thank you for having us, Jared.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
You owe me a Coke again, Tonia.
Hopefully that intro did you both a little bit of justice. We'd like to start with kind of a little bit of an origin story for folks listening. A lot of our folks who we work with are underrepresented filmmakers and folks who want to be in your seats one day. So Bruce, maybe I'll start with you. I know that across your career, you've had a lot of films focused on LGBTQ plus characters, obviously in Milk, now Rustin, even American Beauty. I'm curious if you could talk about a little bit of your background and what types of stories you've been drawn to and why.
Well, it's kind of funny because on October 26th, there was a piece that I wrote in Variety that's sort of the whole summation of my LGBTQ filmmaking and personal career for the last 30 years. So listeners might want to check that out for the longer version. But the first film that I worked on, I was the Directors Guild trainee of The Color Purple, the original version, directed by Steven Spielberg in 1985. And so that was a very powerful, beautiful, bold at the time LGBTQ representation in the first movie I worked on right from the start. So it was always something that was on my radar to hopefully get to tell those stories. And I feel like I've been incredibly fortunate and blessed over the years between To Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar, Milk, the ABC miniseries When We Rise, and now Rustin, among others, to have a chance as an out gay producer to tell stories about out gay people. And I do believe that representation matters and inclusion matters. And if we don't tell these stories ourselves, they're not going to get told.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I know we connected a few years ago, on that exact topic. And I'm so glad that this film has come to life. Tonia, tell us a little bit about your journey. What inspired you to, be attracted to these types of projects, and what drew you to, filmmaking and storytelling in this form, which I would say is very much in the social impact, space of what we do.
Yeah. I mean, I think like so many other people who came to town, we came to town in order to make movies and television shows because of the shows and the films that we grew up watching that deeply impacted us and deeply affected us. And for me, I moved to a very small town, moved away from a big city to a very small town when I was going into middle school, and found that really the only friends that I had were characters in films, and specifically characters in films that the corner store had on their shelves, because that was really the only movies that I had access to. And as I grew up, I found myself increasingly wondering where I was in those movies. And I kept thinking, if I watch enough movies, I'll see myself somewhere in one of them. And I went through Breakfast Club phase, I went through all sorts of different phases, and I never really saw a version of a character that felt like me. And I didn't know why. Honestly, it wasn't. It was befuddling to me. When I arrived in Los Angeles, I arrived really wanting to make adult dramas, really wanting to make commercial movies, really wanting to use storytelling to share and impart, ideas and themes into the world in a different way. And also found myself needing a job. And so I went through a whole series of jobs before making some of those movies that you mentioned earlier, learning how to make big, broad commercial movies for places like Disney and people like Peter Chernin, with people that I loved. But it really wasn't until the Obamas launched their production company with the explicit goal of telling stories within their values and uplifting stories about people who had never been on screen before, that I really felt like, well, wait a minute, that's why I moved here 20 years ago. Like, how can I do that? How can I be a part of that?
Yeah.
And so I came to Higher Ground almost exactly 5 years ago. One of the first phone calls that I received at Higher Ground was from Bruce Cohen, whose work I knew, but who I actually did not know personally at all. And he was calling about Bayard Rustin. And so for me, it's actually been a long journey of trying to learn how to make movies generally, and then finally having a job where I can make the movies that I really came to town hoping to be able to create someday. And then Rustin really being the first of those.
Right. And that's, yeah, it's very helpful, I think, for folks to hear, and kind of how you've persevered to over those many years to kind of find your home in the industry, so to speak, at Higher Ground. I guess, Bruce, I could go back to you. This is a really powerful film. I had a chance to screen it at Netflix, and I know see you briefly over there a few weeks ago. There's so many elements to the story that I think are, as we said at the top, largely unknown until hopefully this film will change that. Tell us about the origins of this particular story, Rustin's story, and kind of how did you dive into the subject, and to walk us through some of the maybe the iterations of this project kind of coming to light.
There was a beautiful documentary about Bayard called Brother Outsider that played the rounds of the LGBT film festivals in the 90s. And I had seen it at Outfest. And there was a moment in the 90s where the LGBT community knew who Bayard Rustin was and had begun to claim him as an icon of ours. And I thought that had continued. But I learned that was not as much the case as we would hope when Lance Black, who I had worked with on Milk and also on When We Rise, he sent me the script that he and Julian Brees had written. And I was very excited even just to receive a script about Bayard, because I knew that he was someone's story that needed to be told. And then the script was just so beautiful and powerful that I was incredibly excited to come on board and to try and help get it made. And as we started trying to get it made, I learned that no one knew who Bayard Rustin was. And even a lot of LGBTQ people didn't know. And I realized that it hadn't really been passed on through the generations, and that he was really in very much danger of being forgotten. George C. Wolfe likes to say that he made history, he changed history, and history returned the favor by ignoring him. But we brought on George C. Wolfe, the brilliant visionary director, who he had curated a civil rights museum in Atlanta, an entire exhibit on the March on Washington. So he very much knew who Bayard Rustin was, and was incredibly moved and excited when I called to tell him about the project, because he had been dreaming about finding a way to tell Bayard's story. Then we went back to the drudgery of no one in Hollywood knowing who Bayard Rustin was. But I do remember thinking, well, I know one person who knows who Bayard Rustin was. And the person I was thinking of was the person who had given Bayard the Presidential Medal of Freedom posthumously at the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, which is exactly 10 years ago, because now we're at the 60th. And that was President Barack Obama. And in a gift from the queer gods, Higher Ground had literally opened their doors like a month before, the Obama's production company. So that's where the idea came from for Julian and Lance and George and I to send this script to Tonia at Higher Ground and see what she thought of it.
That's a great cliffhanger for Tonia to take off of. So I'm curious to kind of take it from there. You received the script, Tonia, and then
okay. So I get it.
Go
Yes.
ahead.
So I returned from lunch one day. Bruce Cohen has left word for me. I'm very excited by that because of all the films that he's made and sort of knowing of him in the business. I call him back right away, and he said, you know, I want to do the Bayard Rustin movie. I have a beautiful screenplay by, Julian Brees and Lance Black. George C. Wolfe is directing. Are you in? And normally you would say, well, please send me the script. I'd love to read it. And I just said, yeah, I just blurted out, yes. And said, obviously, I'd like to read the script and talk to George. I need to talk to the Obamas, but yes. But let's take yes as an answer for today. And so, I read the script and was immediately blown away by a number of different aspects of it. First of all, the focus of it, it takes the entire film takes place really largely over the course of one summer. It's a very condensed timeline during which so much happens. Bayard obviously organizes this march on Washington, but he also repairs his relationship with Dr. King, and Dr. King becomes Dr. King. A boy named Martin becomes Dr. King, really. And so it felt incredibly focused. The character of Bayard himself also was jumping off the page. The tone of it was great, all of that. But the truth is that movies, for me, really come down to, do they make you feel something that you need to feel in the moment that you're reading them or consuming them? And there was a moment in the script, and for listeners who haven't seen the movie, I'm not going to reveal which moment it is, but there was a moment in the script where I just started really weeping, and I thought the writing is beautiful. I know what this can be. I know what this can feel like. I also know what it can mean to audiences to see this, because I'm experiencing it right now. And I ran into my bedroom where my now wife was, and I said, I think I just found the first movie that Higher Ground will produce. And she said, you should call the president, which is what we did. So it from there, as Bruce said, President Obama knew exactly who Bayard Rustin was very excited, enthusiastic. And we, collectively together went to Netflix, who joined the party, and the rest is history.
Wow. Yeah.
No, Tonia, I love that, because I hadn't heard you tell that story exactly that way before, but I got a kick out of it, because normally when you're talking to anyone else in Hollywood, when they say you should call the president, you're talking about the president of your company or the president of the studio. But in this case, she literally meant you should call the president.
I really meant you should call President Obama. Yes.
And that's that's just incredible. And Tonia, like, what did I have a Obama campaign tattoo on my left arm. So I
really?
Yes. And was a volunteer, and I just saw Reggie Lee, Obama's body guy from back in the day, about a week ago, who I've known since like 2006 off and on. So I'm an Obama guy through and through. And I guess my question is, tell us more about like what the president said, and did you get a chance to talk to the First Lady? What was exciting to them? What jumped out to them about the project?
Yes, no, I tell the story, you should call the president, but the truth is that President and Mrs. Obama together from the start, they are the principals of the company. They do everything together. All decisions are joint decisions, and all conversations are with the two of them. So they together immediately jumped in, and were enthusiastic. By the way, I'm also an Obama alum. I was a door knocker for Obama in New Mexico one year and in Colorado another year. I don't have a tattoo though, so you've got me beat on that one.
Okay,
me three all over the country, but no tattoo.
No tattoo. Okay, right. So maybe we need to set that up.
So
yeah.
No, I mean, listen, they were both enthusiastic. They were both excited. They were both eager. They knew George's work first and foremost in the theater. They're both huge theater lovers, which I think you probably know, but is really true. So they knew George's work from the public. Ma Rainey had just completed filming, but none of us had seen the movie yet. But we already heard through the Netflix grapevine about how brilliant it was. And so it felt also like this was a perfect story for Higher Ground to embark on telling. And already George Wolfe had been brought to the table by Bruce, and he was the perfect person for us to also embark on our first film with, because he is really a master. And also, we knew that we would be able to provide him a platform to get his film out in an ever bigger way. So, in terms of how exactly that first conversation went down, I would just say they were incredibly enthusiastic, totally supportive, and have remained steadfast in that support every day since.
Yeah, not surprised. I love that, and shows, I think, the character, the two folks you work for there. Bruce, could you tell us a bit more? Tonia touched on who Bayard was. I guess this is a two-parter because I think it's very related. One, could you just tell us a little bit about the man and build on what Tonia said about him, and also you mentioned, we talked about, sort of forgotten in a lot of ways. Why do you think that is? And yeah, just give us a sense of who he was and why he was so pivotal.
Well, Bayard was a force of nature. He was a joyous, charming, extremely charismatic, extremely funny, extremely entertaining, larger than life figure, in addition to having these absolutely stupendous organizing powers. You see in the film, one of the things that we really wanted to show, and one of the things that President Obama really asked us to make sure we show, was the nuts and bolts ground, on the ground activism of Bayard, and how he really put together every little detail of the march and the vast number of details that had to be thought of. Also keeping in mind that today we know from marches, there was the Women's March after George Floyd, everyone was in the streets. There's been a lot of times over the last 40, 50 years where people have marched in Washington out on the streets, but there hadn't really been one before the March on Washington. Bayard invented this. So we really wanted to show in the film that it had never been done before. The reason why a man of this incredible personal power and incredible organizing power hasn't really been heard of is actually a very specific story that the movie tells. So I'm not going to give that away. But when you see the movie, it lays out very clearly how and why he accomplished what he accomplished, creating the idea for the march and putting it on, but how and why he didn't get the credit that was due, and how and why it was not in the interest of the civil rights movement, as soon as the march was over, for his name to be associated with having created the march. And that's really the story that we're telling now. It's the story of the march. And it's also the story of why no one's heard of Bayard Rustin.
Right. Yeah, no, that's right. It is very, very well explained there. And I hope folks will see it and learn about his life, but also why we don't know more about him until now, largely. Tonia, tell us a little bit about, in terms of casting this project, if you can comment on that, because that was fascinating. Colman Domingo did an extraordinary job. I thought it was, basically born for the role. Was just phenomenal, and the entire cast around him. But he really also brought, to Bruce's point, a sense of humility, humanity, complexity to the role. I just wonder if you could just talk about casting and why Colman was the right person in particular for Bayard.
Sure. Yes. I want to say two things. Let me talk about Colman, and then I've got one additional comment. George always says that Bayard was this perfect magical combination of incredibly smart, incredibly charming, incredibly funny, and incredibly inspiring, all at the same time. And his ability to walk through the world that way and to embody all of that at the same time is why he was able to pull something off like getting 250,000 people to Washington in like 8 weeks over the course of summer of 1963. And so when casting the role, we're looking for somebody who can do all of that. And there are not many people who can do all of that. And Colman was perfect for the role, is perfect for the role, embodied Bayard so completely and so fully, had always been circling the project. I think from the very first phone call, Bruce had sort of whispered his name to me. But of course, there's a process that you have to go through when you're making a film to arrive at, that offer. both a creative offer from the filmmaker and the team, but also financial offer from the studio. And so as George was going through the process of getting ready to shoot the film and making notes on the script and starting to envision the blocking of the script, he always says he would be writing notes on the screenplay, and he would just start to think to himself, oh, that would actually look really good with Colman in it. And, and start to go, I could kind of hear Colman's voice saying that line, and so on and so forth. And coming to the really natural, somewhat obvious now in hindsight conclusion that there was only one person who could ever play the role, and it is Colman Domingo, who had been doing research on Bayard, who had been preparing for the role of Bayard in some way or another for a really long time. I'm really waiting for that final determination to be made. George and Colman had worked together before and known each other for a long time. Bruce had known him for a long time. Lance Black had known him for a long time. And so it really was kind of always going to be him. And we were very excited when that came true. The thing I want to say, going off, Jared, of something else you just brought up and something Bruce mentioned too, is, when you see the movie, let me just say out loud, if you want movies like this to be made, see the movie. It is funny, it is inviting, it is charming. You will learn something, you will be inspired, you will have conversations with your friends after it. You'll be glad you spent the 2 hours, less than 2 hours, to do it. If you want movies like this, see the movie. See the movie however you want to watch it, on Netflix, in a theater, it doesn't matter. The only thing that we can do to keep stories like this from disappearing into history forever is to see them, to share them, to witness them, to talk about them, and to make more.
Yeah. No,
amen.
Bruce, do you want to answer that?
Just amen.
Okay, yeah. And for those who don't know, select theaters November 3rd, and I understand worldwide on Netflix November 17th. So you have lots of opportunities to see it. As you said, in either setting or both. Bruce, I want to build on what Tonia just said and what you said earlier about the complexity of I guess you call it the nuances, the complexity, the nuts and bolts, as you told us that the Obamas wanted to make sure was included, of organizing, right? Of being part of a major social change movement like Bayard was part of. And what was fascinating to me about the film was MLK is in the film, but for maybe one of the first times, he's not the central sort of driving force. We see Bayard and the organizers, white, black, and everything in between, gay, straight, and everything, kind of doing this work, and the complexities there. Could you talk just a little bit about that, and maybe what resonances you feel like that has for people now who are looking for, to foster social change?
Well, that's certainly one of the goals and dreams of the film, is that it would inspire a new generation of activists. What we see in the film, which historians have recognized, and now hopefully the public will as well, is that Bayard put together this extraordinary coalition that hadn't existed before: young and old, black and white, rich, working class, poor, and together they changed the world. And that's the coalition we need again right now. We need to add the LGBTQ family to that coalition this time around, because they didn't, other than Bayard, they didn't really exist as out people back in 1963. One of the other extraordinary things about Bayard is he was out when it literally didn't even exist. That coalition needs to come back together. We are in potentially very dark times now. We're in a period where marginalized communities, underrepresented communities' rights are literally getting yanked away from us, including by the Supreme Court of the United States. That's something that hasn't really happened before. And our communities, Black, women, LGBTQ, are losing our rights. So it's going to take a Bayard Rustian coalition to come back together again. And hopefully this film, to some small extent, can help show the way or inspire that type of thing to happen, because it's going to need to happen. It's going to need to happen fast.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Amen to that. And well said. I guess, Tonia, could you just add to that in terms of maybe one of the last questions here, just the impact of this film? What have you been hearing thus far? I know it's not in full release yet, but what do you hope the impact will be, to build on what Bruce said, for folks who maybe are activists in some right, but also, might be inspired to become involved and engaged?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. we hope that the film will inspire people to become involved and engaged, period, full stop. We also hope that the film will let people know that it takes everybody. It takes whatever your personality is, background is, gender, social class, race, all of it. It takes you. You have to come. We want you there. You were there in history. We need you there today. In order for any of this social change that I think we're all fighting for to be permanent and lasting, it takes all of us to join arms, put aside our differences, and march forward together. That's what the movie's about. Is what Bayard was championing his whole life. And if we've done our jobs even a little bit right, that's the atmosphere and hope that you'll take away from the film.
Yeah, beautifully said. Well, I mean, we'll leave it there. That was a great place to end. Bruce, Tonia, this is a fantastic film. Congratulations. I think very resonant, very powerful, very inspiring. Again, it's Rustin, select theaters November 3rd and premiering worldwide on Netflix the 17th of November. And I hope folks will check it out. Thanks to you both for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Jared.
Thank you, Jared.
Yes.